Hello, and thanks for joining us here on Encore. Coming up on today's film show. Star Wars returns to its origins with Solo. Marion Cotillard is less than angelic in debut feature Angel Face. And we revisit 1960s British horror Peeping Tom as it gets a re-release. I'm joined by film critic Lisa Nesselson. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Olivia.
Now, we're starting with a film that usually starts in a galaxy far, far away, but it seems like these days Star Wars is never that far away. The latest in the anthology series is Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, that premiered last week at Cannes, complete with Chewbacca on the red carpet, not a look we normally see there.
Well, the American trade papers keep insisting that there's a strict dress code for evening screenings in Cannes. But if you're a Wookiee, that is clearly not true. If you're a tall, full fur-covered Wookiee with simian teeth and a speaking voice that's a cross between a congested lion and an even more congested lion, you have more to fear from my computer's spell check function than you do from the Cannes Film Festival. Why is that? Because it kept changing Wookiee, a perfectly good made-up word, into rookie. Now, this latest Star Wars installment introduces us to Han Solo when he was a rookie. And this is what Hollywood calls an origin story, which they take us back to let us in on the background of an established character's life before he became an established character. And I will admit to not caring all that much about this particular character when he was young or when he turned into Harrison Ford. That said, even I know that this bombastic galactic crockpot contains a few tidbits worth sharing. So that would be, we learn how Han got his last name, we learn how he and Chewbacca first met, and we learn how he got his hands on the controls of his beloved spacecraft, the Millennium Falcon. Let's take a look at the antics.
Captain Lando Calrissian.
Han Solo. Looks like you're having a good day.
I'm a lucky guy.
Can I ask you a question, Captain Calrissian?
Anything, Han?
It's Han, but that's okay. I heard a story about you. I was wondering if it's true.
Everything you've heard about me is true.
So even if you weren't super interested in Han Solo's story, was there anything you liked about the film?
Anything? Well, I did enjoy a sassy female robot named L3. Be on the lookout for her. You can't miss her if you go. But the entire film is about the hunt for a certain kind of valuable fuel. Okay, it's just that they expend vast amounts of this same fuel flying all over in search of fuel. It's, to me, like using up all the remaining pencils in Europe, writing letters saying, do you have any pencils? Two original directors were removed from this very pricey production, and talented veteran Ron Howard was brought in to complete the movie. France 24 spoke to him in Cannes, and this is what he had to say about his approach to the material.
I went into this and decided to treat it like it was a true story. And that the people who know the movies and really understand the galaxy, whether they're creature designers or visual effects supervisors or production designers, I use them as almost as technical advisors, like I would if it was about Formula One racing or NASA and trying to go to the moon. And it was really a fun, effective way, and it absolutely applied. The same methodology really worked. I had a lot of fun.
Now, speaking of Cannes, there was a big push at the film festival this year to highlight women's roles in the entertainment industry and all industries, in fact. And there were a good number of films directed by women in the official selection. There was first-time writer-director Vanessa Filho, who had her film Angel Face in Un Certain Regard, the sidebar selection. And she also had a very well-known leading lady in that one.
That's true. Most first-time directors don't land actors as established as Marion Cotillard. But here she plays the sort of flaky, permanently screwed up screwball that actors love to play, but audiences don't necessarily want to line up to see. I found this movie almost completely unnecessary, but a lot of my French colleagues like it quite a bit. So Melanie, Cotillard's character, is a full-time party girl. She has long blonde hair with short black roots. If wanting to be a good mother and being a good mother were one and the same, she would pass with flying colors. But as it is, she devotes more time to her makeup than to the care and feeding of her precocious and terribly lonely 8-year-old daughter, Ellie. It has never really sunk in that once you give birth, you're supposed to actually look after your offspring. Let's take a look.
Ma gueule d'ange, c'est maman. Maman t'aime, tu sais. Surtout, tu t'inquiètes pas pour moi, hein. 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. Crois pas que je pense pas à toi. Je pense à toi tout le temps. Ta maman, elle t'aime fort.
So if the mum's a bit of a liability, are there any responsible adults around?
Not really. Since her mom flounced off with some guy she just met and didn't leave any money for food, Ellie takes herself to the local carnival where she meets a retired cliff diver who she thinks might make a good substitute dad. How Marlene ended up with such a smart, poised daughter is an absolute mystery. But there were quite a few films at Cannes this year, oddly enough, about people who could not care less about their children. The Kazakh actress who won the Best Actress award, deservedly so, plays a character who has just given birth in a Moscow hospital, manages to force open a painted shut window, drop down into the freezing, sleeting snow just to get away so she won't have to breastfeed her infant or ever see it again. In the Lebanese film that won third prize, a 12-year-old boy from the slums of Beirut actually takes his parents to court and wants them to be charged with having brought him into the world because his life has been absolutely hellish because they can't provide for him. So an angel face mom claims to love her daughter, but she just can't be bothered expressing that affection in what we'd call a useful, mature manner. Cotillard is obviously having fun, but I didn't.
Okay, well, we're moving to something very, very different now. A classic from the archives, the re-release of British horror film Peeping Tom.
Yay! This classic from 1960 was considered way too violent and upsetting when it was first released, and it still packs a visceral punch, although the bar for icky ways of torturing and murdering people in real life and on screen has shifted considerably since then. Director Michael Powell's portrait of a young male psychopath who takes amateur film footage of his victims at the moment he murders them, uses subjective camera to make the viewer extremely uncomfortable. Not that watching the activities of psychopathic murderers should be comfortable. There were semi-hysterical articles from Cannes about Lars von Trier's new film, The House That Jack Built, in which Matt Dillon plays a particularly vicious and particularly creative serial killer. People kept tweeting that 100 people walked out of the screening. Big deal, 100 people out of the 2,000 the auditorium holds. And it's worth noting that 250 people walked out of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey when it was shown at the New York Film Festival back in 1968, and we now know that that is an absolute undisputed masterpiece. Anyway, serial killers tend to be very ingenious, otherwise they wouldn't be serial killers. They would kill 1 or 2 people, and then they would get arrested for murdering them. Here's a glimpse of Peeping Tom.
So you mentioned it was considered to be pretty scandalous at the time. Just how upset were the critics in 1960?
Well, the reception to this film, which explores the voyeurism involved in watching movies, was so vicious that it pretty much ended Michael Powell's career as a director in the UK. It's now considered a masterwork, one of the best psychological horror films ever made, and an excellent exploration of the nature of fear. But back in 1960, Derek Hill, reviewing for the Tribune, suggested that, quote, the only really satisfactory way way to dispose of Peeping Tom would be to shovel it up and flush it swiftly down the nearest sewer, end quote. And the Daily Express claimed that the film was more nauseating and depressing than the leper colonies of East Pakistan, the back streets of Bombay, and the gutters of Calcutta. I guess India was the go-to place for things that were upsetting.
Wow, Daily Express has probably not changed its tune very much since. Now, speaking of 1960s Britain, perhaps the biggest cultural exponent of that time was, of course, the Fab Four, and a film was made about the Beatles in 1978 called I Want to Hold Your Hand. That film is now available on DVD here in France.
It's been hard to get your hands on I Want to Hold Your Hand, so this is great news. It is named for the Beatles' 1963 hit song, and this was the first film directed by Robert Zemeckis. Now, who's he? Well, he's the guy who made Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, and also Contact, Flight, The Walk. It's the jubilantly wacky story of a group of New Jersey teenagers determined to get tickets to be in the audience for the first appearance by the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964. Now, people of my generation all gathered around the family TV set to see that. The recent royal wedding, I think there was one, was a minor flash in the pan compared to the impact of that TV show, because Beatlemania swept through the nation.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Lisa Nesselson, for joining us this week. We'll leave you a taste of that Beatlemania as featured in I Want to Hold Your Hand. Remember, you can get more arts, culture, and of course movies on our website. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Excuse me. Rosie, did you hear what I said? I've got to start saving my money for more important things. I mean, for God's sakes, tomorrow night I'm getting, you know.
All right, I'll buy it for you as an elopement present.
Do you want to tell the whole world? Anyway, if you're going to get me something practical that I can use, like Tupperware.
Oh my God! Oh my God, it's Paul! Oh, I'm gonna die! Oh my God, it's Paul! It's Paul! Oh, I'm gonna die right here! He's so cute, so sexy!
He's cardboard.